Jasmine Washington's cheek stung as the white pilot's hand connected with her face in front of shocked first-class passengers. "Know your place," he snarled. Little did he know she wasn't just any passenger, she was Atlanta's first black female chief of police, a tech billionaire, and his life was about to implode. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you believe justice should always be served, no matter who you are or what uniform you wear. Now let's see how one entitled pilot's world came crashing down faster than turbulence at 30,000 feet. Jasmine Washington wasn't born into privilege. Far from it. Growing up in Vine City, one of Atlanta's poorest neighborhoods, her childhood was defined by struggle and determination. Her parents, her father a city bus driver and her mother a hospital janitor, worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. But even as a young girl, Jasmine showed exceptional promise. "My daughter's mind works differently," her third-grade teacher told her parents during a parent-teacher conference. "She solves problems in ways I've never seen before." By 12, Jasmine was building computers from discarded parts she collected from neighborhood dumpsters. By 14, she had taught herself coding and created a simple app to help her father navigate the most efficient bus routes. Her intellectual gifts couldn't be contained by her circumstances, and her high school teachers took notice. Despite attending an underfunded public school, Jasmine's perfect SAT scores and remarkable aptitude for mathematics and computer science earned her a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, one of the most prestigious technical universities in the country. But the transition wasn't easy. "You must be in the wrong building," a professor told her on her first day, assuming she was lost. "Computer science is in the next building over." "I'm in the right place," Jasmine had responded, presenting her class schedule. The professor's embarrassed flush was the first of many similar encounters. Throughout her college years, Jasmine faced constant microaggressions and outright racism. Study groups would mysteriously have "no more room" when she asked to join. Professors would express surprise at her excellent work, as if they'd expected mediocrity. Male classmates would ask if she needed help understanding basic concepts she had already mastered. None of it stopped her. Jasmine graduated at the top of her class with dual degrees in computer science and criminal justice, an unusual combination that would later prove prophetic. At 25, with just $10,000 in savings and a brilliant idea, Jasmine founded SecureNet, a cybersecurity company that specialized in creating secure database systems for law enforcement agencies. Her innovation was revolutionary. A system that both protected sensitive information from hackers while also ensuring transparency and accountability for police actions. "Technology should serve justice, not obstruct it," became her company motto. Within 5 years, SecureNet had contracts with police departments in 20 major cities. By 30, the company had gone international. At 35, Jasmine became the youngest black female billionaire in American history when SecureNet went public, valued at over $4 billion. But financial success never distanced Jasmine from her roots. She established the Washington Foundation, which funded STEM programs in disadvantaged neighborhoods across Atlanta. She built a state-of-the-art community center in Vine City, offering free technology training to residents. She created scholarship programs for black girls interested in computer science. What the public didn't know, what Jasmine had kept carefully concealed, was her second role. When Atlanta's police department faced a crisis of leadership after a series of scandals involving police brutality and racial profiling, the mayor had approached Jasmine with an unprecedented offer, to become the city's chief of police while maintaining her position as CEO of SecureNet. "The department needs someone who understands both technology and justice," the mayor had argued. "Someone who can transform the culture from within." Jasmine accepted, but with one condition: her dual role would remain confidential. She didn't want publicity or accolades. She wanted results. For 2 years, she had successfully kept her police position separate from her tech identity, implementing reforms that had reduced complaints against officers by 40% and improved response times in minority neighborhoods. Now, Jasmine was preparing for her most significant career move yet, a trip to London to finalize a contract with the British government. The deal would implement SecureNet's technology across the entire UK police force, a contract worth billions. She had boarded her Atlanta to London flight dressed in comfortable jeans, a simple blouse, and carrying an expensive but understated leather bag. She had deliberately avoided her usual business attire, hoping to travel without recognition. After all, she wasn't traveling as Chief Washington today, but as Ms. Washington, CEO. Little did she know that this simple flight would become the catalyst for her most public battle yet. Captain Maxwell Reynolds came from aviation royalty. His grandfather had been one of the first commercial airline pilots in America in the golden age of air travel. His father had commanded jumbo jets for Pan Am during its heyday. Flying wasn't just Maxwell's career, it was his birthright. Born and raised in the exclusive suburbs of Greenwich, Connecticut, Maxwell had never wanted for anything. His family's sprawling colonial home, summer house in Martha's Vineyard, and connections to the highest echelons of society had insulated him from the realities that most Americans faced. When it came time for college, Maxwell didn't have to worry about entrance exams or competition. A legacy admission to the Air Force Academy had been arranged before he even applied. While there, he performed adequately but not exceptionally, professors and superior officers alike recognizing the Reynolds name and offering leeway that other cadets didn't receive. After a brief and unremarkable military career, Maxwell followed his father's footsteps into commercial aviation, landing a coveted position at Atlantic Airways, one of the nation's premier airlines. His family connections had ensured he started at the top, bypassing the regional airlines where most pilots paid their dues. Throughout his 27-year career at Atlantic Airways, Captain Reynolds had developed a reputation. Among white male colleagues, he was known as old school, a man who didn't bow to political correctness. Among female flight attendants and pilots of color, he was known by other names, whispered in break rooms and text messages warning of his shifts. "Watch out for Captain Reynolds," was the common refrain. "He's from another era." Complaints have been filed over the years, comments about female attendants' appearances, jokes with racial undertones directed at black colleagues, mysteriously harsh evaluations of Asian co-pilots. But nothing ever stuck. The airline's executives, many of whom had vacationed at the Reynolds family compound or attended the same Ivy League universities, always found reasons to dismiss the complaints. A misunderstanding, they would say. Or, no malicious intent was found. Recently, Maxwell's life had taken a downward turn. His wife of 24 years had finally left him, tired of his increasingly bitter outlook and volatile temper. His grown children had limited contact with him, embarrassed by his vocal rants against diversity hires and participation trophy culture. At 52, Maxwell found himself alone, resentful, and convinced the world was changing for the worse. The morning of the fateful Atlanta to London flight, Maxwell was already in a foul mood. He had spotted a new flight attendant, Aisha Johnson, a young black woman recently transferred from domestic routes to international flights. "They'll let anyone on international these days," he muttered to his co-pilot, Benjamin Chen, as they prepared the flight plan. "When I started, you had to earn these routes." Benjamin, a 34-year-old first-generation Chinese-American who had worked his way up through regional airlines despite holding degrees from MIT and Stanford, said nothing. He had learned that engaging with Reynolds' comments only encouraged more. Shortly before boarding was set to begin, Maxwell confronted Aisha in the galley as she prepared the first-class cabin. "Your uniform isn't pressed properly," he said, though her Atlantic Airways uniform was immaculate. "And your hair is unprofessional." Aisha's braids were neatly styled in a bun, fully compliant with airline regulations. "My uniform and hair meet all company standards, Captain," she responded calmly, having been warned about Reynolds by other flight attendants. "I decide what standard on my aircraft," Reynolds snapped. "If you can't maintain proper appearance, perhaps you should return to domestic routes." The confrontation ended only when the gate agent announced the beginning of boarding. Maxwell returned to the cockpit, seething at what he perceived as insubordination. The final insult to Maxwell's day came when the gate agent informed him that departure would be delayed by 15 minutes to accommodate a VIP passenger still clearing security. "We're not holding this aircraft for anyone," Maxwell declared. "Departure time is departure time." When informed that the passenger in question was in first class and the airline had specifically authorized the brief delay, Maxwell became even more irritated. "First class," he scoffed. "Must be some football player or rapper." The casual racism of his assumption went unchallenged by the gate staff, who had also learned to avoid confrontation with the volatile captain. As the boarding process neared completion, Maxwell made a decision. Rather than sending a flight attendant to check on the situation, as was protocol, he would personally address this VIP who thought they were important enough to delay his flight. Straightening his captain's hat and adjusting his epaulets, Maxwell Reynolds stepped out of the cockpit, unaware that he was about to commit the biggest mistake of his career. Jasmine Washington rushed through Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke with Atlanta's mayor. "I understand the concerns about the new bodycam policy," she said, weaving through crowds. "But transparency has to be non-negotiable. We can discuss the details when I return from London." Her meeting with the mayor had run long, causing her to arrive at the airport later than planned. Despite having TSA pre-check, security had taken longer than usual due to a system malfunction. Now, she was the last passenger to board Atlantic Airways Flight 207 to London Heathrow. "Ms. Washington, we've been expecting you," the gate agent said with a smile of relief as Jasmine approached, slightly breathless. "They're ready for you on board." Jasmine thanked her and made her way down the jetway. In her rush, she looked nothing like the polished CEO usually seen in business magazines or the stern chief of police who commanded respect in uniform. Today she wore comfortable dark jeans, a simple navy blouse, and white sneakers, practical attire for the 8-hour flight ahead. Her natural hair was styled in a neat twist, and she wore minimal jewelry, just small diamond studs and her mother's wedding band on a chain around her neck. She carried one item that hinted at her status, a handcrafted leather messenger bag that had been a gift from the British Prime Minister during a cybersecurity conference. The bag, worth thousands, was understated but exquisite. As Jasmine stepped onto the plane, flight attendant Aisha Johnson greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington. Let me show you to your seat in first class." From the cockpit doorway, Captain Reynolds watched this interaction with narrowed eyes. He observed Jasmine's casual attire, her relaxed demeanor with the flight attendant, and made an immediate judgment: this woman didn't belong in first class. While Aisha helped Jasmine store her carry-on in the overhead compartment, Maxwell approached, his captain's stripes gleaming under the cabin lights. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of decades in command. "I believe there may be some confusion. This is the first-class cabin." Jasmine looked up, momentarily puzzled. "Yes, I know. 2A is my seat." She gestured to her assigned place by the window. Maxwell's eyes flicked from Jasmine to her boarding pass and back again. "May I see that?" Without waiting for permission, he took the boarding pass from her hand and studied it with exaggerated scrutiny. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Jasmine asked, her tone professional but firm. "This appears to be a first-class boarding pass," Maxwell said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Are you sure you didn't accidentally receive an upgrade you didn't purchase?" Several passengers in nearby seats shifted uncomfortably. Aisha stepped forward. "Captain Reynolds, Ms. Washington is confirmed for first class. I've already verified her boarding pass." Maxwell ignored the flight attendant, keeping his attention fixed on Jasmine. "It's just that we typically see a certain caliber of passenger in first class. Perhaps you were meant to be in premium economy?" The implication was clear to everyone within earshot. A ripple of discomfort passed through the first-class cabin. An older white couple exchanged glances. A middle-aged black businessman 2 rows back set down his newspaper, watching the interaction intently. "My boarding pass is correct," Jasmine stated calmly, extending her hand. "I'd like it back, please." Maxwell reluctantly returned the boarding pass but remained standing over her as she took her seat. "I'll need to see some ID as well." Jasmine reached into her bag and produced her driver's license, which Maxwell examined with the same exaggerated thoroughness. "Jasmine Washington," he read aloud, as if testing the authenticity of the name itself. "And what brings you to London?" "Business," Jasmine replied simply, maintaining her composure though her pulse had quickened. Years of police work had taught her to recognize escalating situations, and the captain's body language was sending clear warning signals. "What kind of business would that be?" Maxwell pressed, overstepping all normal boundaries of passenger interaction. Aisha intervened again. "Captain, we're ready for departure when you are. I can handle any passenger concerns." "I'm handling this," Maxwell snapped, not taking his eyes off Jasmine. Then, lowering his voice to a near whisper, he leaned closer to Jasmine. "Did someone buy this ticket for you? Or did you just find it?" The racist insinuation hung in the air. Several passengers gasped audibly. Jasmine's training as both a CEO and police chief had prepared her for moments like this. She reached discreetly into her bag and activated the recording function on her phone. "Captain," she said, her voice steady and clear enough for nearby passengers to hear, "I purchased my own ticket. I'm a frequent flyer with Atlantic Airways, platinum status. Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd allow me to settle in so we can depart." Something about her calm confidence seemed to further infuriate Maxwell. In his world, people like Jasmine, black, female, young, showed deference to people like him. Her composure read as defiance. "I don't believe you belong here," he said, no longer bothering to disguise his contempt. "I think you should move to your proper seat in economy." "I'm exactly where I belong," Jasmine responded, looking him directly in the eyes. "And I won't be moving." It happened in an instant. Maxwell's face contorted with rage, his hand swung forward, and the sound of the slap echoed through the hushed cabin. His open palm connected with Jasmine's cheek with enough force to snap her head sideways. "Know your place," he snarled. Time seemed to stop. Passengers froze in shock. Aisha's hand flew to her mouth. The business traveler halfway down the aisle stood abruptly. Jasmine slowly turned her face back toward Maxwell, a red mark blooming on her cheek. She hadn't raised a hand to defend herself, she hadn't needed to. The phone in her bag had captured everything. "Captain Reynolds," she said, her voice now taking on a different quality, the unmistakable tone of authority. "I think you've just made the biggest mistake of your career." The first-class cabin erupted into chaos the moment Captain Reynolds' hand connected with Jasmine Washington's face. "Oh my God," gasped a woman in 3C, fumbling for her phone to record. "Hey! You can't do that," shouted the black businessman who had been watching the confrontation unfold. Flight attendant Aisha Johnson immediately rushed to Jasmine's side, positioning herself between the seated woman and the still fuming captain. "Captain Reynolds, step back now," Aisha demanded, her voice trembling but resolute. "This is completely unacceptable." Maxwell seemed momentarily stunned by his own actions, but his expression quickly hardened into defiance. She was being disruptive. "This is my aircraft, and I—" "You assaulted a passenger," interrupted Benjamin Chen, the co-pilot, who had emerged from the cockpit after hearing the commotion. His normally reserved demeanor had vanished, replaced by horrified disbelief at what his captain had done. By now, several passengers had their phones raised, capturing the aftermath. The slap itself had been recorded by at least 3 different angles, ensuring that what had just occurred would not be subject to dispute or denial. A security officer, Marcus Taylor, appeared at the front of the aircraft. He had been stationed nearby and responded to the flight attendant's emergency call button. "What's going on here?" he asked, quickly assessing the tense scene. "This man just assaulted me," Jasmine stated calmly, holding a hand to her reddened cheek. The mark of Reynolds' hand was clearly visible against her dark skin. "She's lying," Reynolds countered, but his voice lacked conviction. She was refusing to comply with crew instructions. Officer Taylor's eyes widened slightly as he recognized Jasmine, though he maintained his professional composure. As a member of Atlanta's airport security detail, he was one of the few people who knew about Jasmine's dual role as both CEO and police chief. "Captain, I'll need you to step off the aircraft immediately," Taylor said firmly. "This is my flight," Reynolds protested. "I'm the captain. You can't remove me." "I most certainly can," Taylor replied, reaching for his radio. "And if you don't comply voluntarily, I'll have additional officers here in 30 seconds. While this confrontation unfolded, Jasmine remained remarkably composed. She took out her phone and made a brief call. "Lawrence, this is Jasmine Washington. There's been an incident on my flight to London. Captain Maxwell Reynolds just physically assaulted me in front of witnesses. Yes, I'm recording everything. I'll need someone from your legal team to meet us at the gate." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted as passengers realized this wasn't just any passenger. The name Washington had registered with several people, and whispers began circulating. "Is that the Washington from SecureNet? The tech billionaire? I think I saw her on the cover of Business Weekly." Reynolds' face paled as the implications began to dawn on him. Before he could speak again, Atlantic Airways Executive Vice President Lawrence Coleman rushed on board, his face flushed with exertion and alarm. "Ms. Washington, I am profoundly sorry," he said, ignoring Reynolds completely. "This behavior is absolutely unacceptable and does not reflect our company's values." Reynolds found himself being escorted off the plane by airport security, still protesting but with diminishing confidence. As he passed the cockpit, Benjamin Chen was already communicating with air traffic control about the delay and the need for a replacement captain. The first-class cabin had divided into distinct reactions. Some passengers were openly outraged, loudly condemning Reynolds' behavior. Others sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure how to process what they had witnessed. A few were busily posting videos to social media, ensuring that the incident would soon go viral. As the commotion began to settle, Officer Taylor leaned down and spoke quietly to Jasmine. "Chief, do you want us to ground the flight? We can have everyone deplane while we take statements." Jasmine considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, these passengers shouldn't have their travel disrupted further. Let's get a replacement captain and proceed with the flight. I'll file my formal statement when we land in London." She discreetly showed her police badge to Taylor, keeping it shielded from the view of other passengers. "Make sure Captain Reynolds is detained until I can arrange for internal affairs to interview him." Lawrence Coleman, hovering anxiously nearby, was now fully aware of the gravity of the situation. Not only had one of his captains assaulted a passenger, that passenger was both a billionaire tech CEO and Atlanta's chief of police. The potential for legal, financial, and public relations disaster was unprecedented. "Ms. Washington, I can't express how deeply sorry we are," Coleman said. "If you'd prefer to take a later flight or a private jet, we can arrange that immediately." "That won't be necessary," Jasmine replied. "I have meetings in London that can't be rescheduled. I'll be continuing on this flight." Her decision to proceed rather than escalate the situation immediately spoke volumes about her character. Even in the face of blatant racism and assault, her priority remained her responsibilities, not retribution. As a replacement captain was arranged and the flight prepared for its delayed departure, Reynolds was escorted to the airline's administrative offices, still unaware of Jasmine's full identity. The bombshell that he had assaulted not just a tech billionaire but also the city's highest-ranking law enforcement officer was yet to drop. What do you think about Captain Reynolds' shocking behavior? Comment number 1 if you believe he should face criminal charges, or number 2 if you think firing him is punishment enough. Hit that like button if you're impressed by Jasmine's incredible composure in the face of such blatant racism. And don't forget to subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. But the question remains, what happens when a privileged pilot faces the full consequences of his actions for perhaps the first time in his life? And how will Atlantic Airways handle the PR nightmare that's about to explode across social media? The story is just beginning. Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters was in complete disarray. The emergency meeting called in the aftermath of the incident had drawn together the airline's entire executive team, legal department, and public relations staff. The boardroom, normally a place of measured discussions about profit margins and fuel costs, now buzzed with panicked energy. "How bad is it?" asked Thomas Whitfield, the airline CEO, his face ashen as he addressed the head of public relations. "Bad," replied Sarah Mitchell, sliding several tablets across the table. "These videos are already trending. #airline assault and #justice for Jasmine are the top hashtags nationally. The original clips have over 2 million views combined, and they're growing exponentially." On the screens, the executives watched in horror as different angles of the incident played out. The footage was damning, there was no ambiguity, no room for alternative interpretation. Captain Maxwell Reynolds had clearly assaulted a female passenger because of her race. In a smaller conference room elsewhere in the building, Reynolds sat alone with the airline's head of security and a union representative. His demeanor had shifted from righteous indignation to growing anxiety. "She was being disruptive," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "She was argumentative and refused to comply with my instructions." The security chief, Robert Thornton, slid a tablet across the table. "This is footage from 3 different passenger recordings. Please show me where Ms. Washington was being disruptive." Reynolds watched the videos, seeing for the first time how the incident appeared to others. His face grew increasingly pale. "Additionally," Thornton continued, "we've reviewed Ms. Washington's boarding pass and reservation. She was properly ticketed for first class. She's a platinum-level frequent flyer who has logged over 100,000 miles with Atlantic Airways in the past year alone." "I didn't know that," Reynolds muttered. "There's more you didn't know," Thornton said grimly. "Ms. Washington is the founder and CEO of SecureNet. She's worth approximately $4.2 billion. Reynolds' mouth fell open. "The tech company?" "Yes. The same company that provides cybersecurity for most major airlines, including ours." Reynolds slumped in his chair, the implications beginning to sink in. But the worst was yet to come. "But perhaps most significantly," Thornton continued, "Ms. Washington is also the chief of police for the city of Atlanta." The blood drained from Reynolds' face. "That's not possible. She can't be both a CEO and..." "She is. It's a special arrangement with the city. She's kept it relatively quiet, but it's not classified information. You assaulted the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the city while in uniform, on duty, in front of dozens of witnesses." As this revelation sank in, Reynolds' union representative, who had been quiet until now, closed his notepad. "I need to step outside and make a call," he said, avoiding eye contact with Reynolds. The implicit message was clear: this case might be beyond what the pilots' union was willing to defend. Back in London, Jasmine Washington's plane had landed at Heathrow Airport. Despite the incident, she had maintained her composure throughout the 8-hour flight, working on her laptop and preparing for her meetings. As she disembarked, she was met by a phalanx of reporters. "Ms. Washington, can you comment on the assault? Will you be pressing charges against Captain Reynolds? Is this incident reflective of a pattern of racism at Atlantic Airways?" Jasmine paused briefly, knowing her response would set the tone for how the incident would be perceived. She spoke clearly and with measured precision. "What happened today is unfortunately not an isolated incident. People of color face these types of discriminatory behaviors daily, though rarely so blatantly or with such physical aggression. I will be working with Atlantic Airways and appropriate legal authorities to ensure that proper accountability occurs. This isn't about one incident or one individual, it's about addressing systemic issues within the airline industry and beyond." Her statement was perfect, dignified, focused on larger issues rather than personal grievance, and forward-looking rather than vengeful. Within hours, her response had been praised across social media platforms as a masterclass in grace under pressure. Meanwhile, the investigation was accelerating on multiple fronts. Atlantic Airways' internal investigation had uncovered a troubling history in Reynolds' personnel file, 6 previous complaints of discriminatory behavior, all from female or minority colleagues. None had resulted in disciplinary action. How did these complaints get buried? Demanded CEO Whitfield, slamming the file onto the conference table. The head of human resources shifted uncomfortably. They were handled at the regional level. Captain Reynolds has connections within the company. Had, corrected Whitfield. He had connections. Past tense. The Atlanta Police Department had launched its own investigation, with internal affairs taking the lead due to Jasmine's position. Detective Marcus Johnson, a 20-year veteran, had been assigned to the case. "I want every passenger on that flight interviewed," he instructed his team. "Every video collected. I want Reynolds' complete history, professional and personal. If he's ever gotten so much as a parking ticket, I want to know about it." The Federal Aviation Administration announced they were opening an investigation as well, focusing not just on Reynolds but on Atlantic Airways' handling of previous complaints against him. "We take allegations of discriminatory behavior by flight crew extremely seriously," their official statement read. "The safety of passengers includes their right to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race, gender, or background." By evening, the media frenzy had intensified. Cable news networks ran the footage on constant rotation. Social media exploded with hashtags and calls for boycotts of Atlantic Airways. The airline's stock price had fallen 15% by market close, a loss of billions in market capitalization in a single day. For Maxwell Reynolds, the personal consequences were mounting as rapidly as the professional ones. His ex-wife called to inform him that she would be seeking full custody of their teenage son. "I don't want him around your toxicity anymore," she said before hanging up. His daughter, a college sophomore, had texted simply, "Don't contact me. I'm changing my last name." As Reynolds sat alone in his suburban Atlanta home that evening, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Atlantic Airways' corporate office. "Maxwell," said the grave voice of Thomas Whitfield, effective immediately, "you are suspended without pay pending the outcome of our investigation. Please surrender your credentials to HR tomorrow morning." "Tom, we've known each other for 20 years, Reynolds pleaded. "You can't just." "It's already done," Whitfield interrupted. "And Maxwell, as your friend, I'm advising you to get a good criminal attorney. The DA's office has requested an interview with you tomorrow." As the call ended, Reynolds' phone buzzed with a news alert. He opened it to see Jasmine Washington's face on the screen, the headline reading, "Tech Billionaire and Secret Police Chief, the woman behind today's viral airline incident." For the first time, Reynolds saw the full picture of the woman he had assaulted. Her impressive resume scrolled before his eyes: MIT graduate at 19, cybersecurity pioneer, youngest black female billionaire, secretly serving as Atlanta's chief of police while running her tech empire, implemented reforms that had reduced police brutality complaints by 40%. The article painted a picture of a woman who had overcome every barrier placed in her path, who had risen from poverty to extraordinary success through brilliance and determination, who had dedicated her life to improving systems rather than simply profiting from them. And he had slapped her because he couldn't imagine she belonged in first class. As the full weight of his actions began to sink in, Maxwell Reynolds poured himself a drink with trembling hands, knowing that his life would never be the same again. The morning after the incident, Maxwell Reynolds awoke to the sound of his doorbell ringing insistently. Bleary-eyed from a night of fitful sleep and too much whiskey, he stumbled to the door to find 2 uniformed police officers standing on his front step. "Captain Maxwell Reynolds?" the female officer asked, her expression professionally neutral. "Yes," Reynolds replied, his mouth suddenly dry. "I'm Officer Garcia and this is Officer Washington, no relation to Chief Washington," she added pointedly. "We're here to serve you with this." She handed him a thick envelope. Inside was a notice informing him that he was being investigated for assault and battery with a hate crime enhancement. The potential penalties listed made his stomach clench, up to 10 years imprisonment if convicted on all counts. Additionally, Officer Garcia continued, "We're here to inform you that an emergency restraining order has been granted, prohibiting you from coming within 500 feet of Jasmine Washington or any Atlantic Airways facility during the investigation." Reynolds stared at the papers in disbelief. "This is ridiculous. It was a minor altercation that's being blown out of proportion." Officer Washington, a tall black man with a serious demeanor, spoke for the first time. "The chief has served this community with distinction for years. What's ridiculous is that you thought you could put your hands on her, or anyone, and face no consequences." As the officers left, Reynolds noticed a news van parked across the street. A reporter stood on the sidewalk, microphone in hand, looking expectantly toward his house. He quickly shut the door, heart pounding. His phone rang almost immediately. It was his attorney, Victoria Mills, whom he had finally contacted late the previous night. "Maxwell, turn on your TV. Channel 7. He fumbled for the remote and switched on the television to see his own face filling the screen, his official Atlantic Airways portrait juxtaposed with a still frame from the incident video, his hand in mid-swing toward Jasmine's face. The cheer-in read, "Exclusive, Captain's History of Discrimination Revealed." The reporter was interviewing a former Atlantic Airways flight attendant named Monica Torres. "It was well known among staff of color to avoid Captain Reynolds' flights if possible," Torres was saying. "He would make comments about our appearance, question our competence, assign us the worst duties. When we complained, nothing happened." The segment cut to another interview, this time with a black pilot who had previously worked with Reynolds. "He once told me that I must have gotten my position through some diversity quota, rather than merit. When I outperformed him during a simulator training, he filed a complaint saying the equipment must have been malfunctioning." Reynolds sank onto his couch, the papers from the police still clutched in his hand. "Maxwell, are you watching this?" his attorney asked over the phone. "Yes," he whispered. "We need to meet immediately. This case is escalating by the hour." In London, Jasmine Washington was conducting business as planned, projecting an image of unflappable professionalism despite the media circus surrounding her. She had just concluded her presentation to the British Home Office when her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. "Atlantic Airways CEO Thomas Whitfield is on his way to London on the company's private jet. He's requesting an in-person meeting tomorrow." Jasmine considered this development. The fact that Whitfield himself was making the journey rather than sending a representative spoke volumes about how seriously the airline was taking the situation. She texted back, "Schedule him for breakfast at my hotel, 8 a.m. Back in Atlanta, the airline was in crisis mode. Atlantic Airways stock had dropped another 7% at market open. #Boycott Atlantic Airways was trending nationally. Celebrities and public figures were publicly canceling their loyalty memberships with the airline. The company's social media accounts were flooded with outraged comments. Customer service lines were jammed with people demanding refunds for upcoming flights. Competitors were already launching targeted ad campaigns emphasizing their commitment to respect for all passengers. In the executive boardroom, the mood was grim. "We're looking at potential losses in the hundreds of millions," reported the CFO, sliding a projection across the table. "And that's a conservative estimate." "What about the legal exposure?" asked a board member. The general counsel cleared his throat. Ms. Washington would have grounds for various civil claims: assault, battery, discrimination, emotional distress. Given her resources and profile, she could make this extremely painful for us. And that's separate from any criminal prosecution Reynolds might face. "Has she made any demands?" asked another board member. "That's the thing," the general counsel replied. "She hasn't. No demand letter, no threatened lawsuit. She's simply letting the investigations proceed while continuing her business in London. That silence is actually more concerning than an immediate legal threat. It suggests she's taking time to consider her options." Meanwhile, Reynolds' personal life continued to unravel. His son had texted to say he wouldn't be coming for his scheduled weekend visit. His country club membership had been suspended, pending review. Former colleagues who had been friendly for decades weren't returning his calls. That afternoon, Reynolds received another blow. His pilots' union representative called to inform him that while the union would provide basic legal counsel for his employment issues, they would not be defending him against criminal charges or funding that defense. The executive committee reviewed the evidence, the representative explained awkwardly. They felt that your actions were outside the scope of representation we can provide. They're abandoning me? Reynolds asked incredulously. Maxwell, you slapped a passenger on camera. Not just any passenger, a billionaire tech CEO who's also the chief of police. What did you expect? What Reynolds hadn't expected was the call he received next. It was from his father, retired Captain William Reynolds, speaking from his retirement home in Florida. What the hell were you thinking, Maxwell? The elder Reynolds demanded without preamble. Dad, it's not what it looks. I've seen the videos. Everyone has seen the videos. You disgraced yourself. You disgraced our name. You disgraced the uniform. She was being. Don't you dare try to justify it, his father cut him off. I flew during segregation, during the civil rights movement, during times of real tension. Never once did I lay hands on a passenger, of any color. That woman did nothing to deserve what you did. The call ended with his father's devastating final words, your grandfather would be ashamed. As evening fell, Reynolds sat alone in his kitchen, a half-empty bottle of scotch before him, scrolling through news coverage on his tablet. Every major outlet was covering the story. Commentators were dissecting his actions, his history, his character. His entire life was being examined under the harsh light of public scrutiny. A new notification appeared. Atlantic Airways had issued an official statement, we have terminated the employment of Captain Maxwell Reynolds, effective immediately. His actions violated our most fundamental values and standards of conduct. We are cooperating fully with all investigations and are committed to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again. No warning, no final meeting, no chance to resign. 30 years of service ended with a press release he learned about from his news feed. Reynolds attempted to log into his company email, only to find his access already revoked. His benefits, his pension, his flight privileges, all gone in an instant. His phone buzzed again. It was a text from Victoria Mills, just got word. DA's office is planning to announce charges tomorrow. Be at my office at 7 a.m. As Reynolds contemplated how quickly his life had fallen apart, across the Atlantic Ocean in London, Jasmine Washington was putting the finishing touches on a comprehensive proposal. It wasn't a lawsuit against Reynolds or Atlantic Airways, it was something far more impactful. She would be presenting it to Thomas Whitfield over breakfast, and she suspected it would change the airline industry forever. The exclusive London hotel restaurant had been cleared of other guests for the 8 a.m. meeting between Jasmine Washington and Atlantic Airways CEO Thomas Whitfield. Security guards discreetly positioned at each entrance ensured privacy. Whitfield had arrived 15 minutes early, nervously adjusting his tie and rehearsing opening statements in his head. When Jasmine entered precisely at 8 a.m., he stood quickly, too quickly, knocking his knee against the table and causing the water glasses to wobble precariously. Ms. Washington, thank you for agreeing to meet, he began, extending his hand. Jasmine shook it firmly. Mr. Whitfield. I appreciate you making the journey. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, her natural hair styled in a sophisticated updo. The only visible reminder of Reynolds' assault was a faint yellowish bruise on her cheek, which makeup couldn't completely conceal. After they were seated and coffee was poured, Whitfield launched into his prepared statement. First, I want to express my deepest personal apologies for what happened. Captain Reynolds' behavior was inexcusable, and his employment has been terminated. Atlantic Airways is prepared to offer a substantial settlement for the distress and harm. Jasmine held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Mr. Whitfield, I'm not interested in a settlement. Whitfield blinked in surprise. I understand you might want to take this to court, and of course that's your right, but I was hoping. I'm not interested in a lawsuit either, Jasmine interrupted again, her voice calm but authoritative. You're not. Whitfield couldn't hide his confusion. No. What happened to me isn't unique, Mr. Whitfield. It's just unusually well documented and happened to someone with the resources to fight back. A settlement or even a successful lawsuit would do nothing to address the underlying issues. She opened her leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. This is what I'm proposing instead. Whitfield took the document with a puzzled expression that slowly transformed to astonishment as he read the title, Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Reform, a 5-year implementation plan for Atlantic Airways. What is this? He asked, flipping through the meticulously detailed pages. It's exactly what it says, Jasmine replied. A complete overhaul of how your airline handles discrimination, from hiring practices to training protocols to accountability systems. The proposal was extraordinarily comprehensive. It included mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, from executives to ground crew. It outlined new hiring practices designed to increase diversity at all levels, especially in leadership positions. It proposed an independent oversight committee to review discrimination complaints. Most significantly, it included the implementation of SecureNet's newly developed software platform designed to track and analyze patterns of discriminatory behavior across the organization. This software identifies warning signs before incidents like mine occur, Jasmine explained. It would have flagged Reynolds years ago based on complaint patterns, allowing for intervention before things escalated. Whitfield looked up from the document, his expression conflicted. Ms. Washington, while I appreciate the thought that went into this, implementing something of this magnitude would cost millions. Approximately $42 million over 5 years, Jasmine confirmed. Which is considerably less than the $137 million your company has already lost in market value since the incident. Not to mention potential losses from boycotts, canceled bookings, and the multiple lawsuits that will likely follow from others coming forward with similar experiences. Whitfield couldn't argue with her math. And if we agree to implement this plan? Then I make a public statement supporting Atlantic Airways' commitment to meaningful change. I don't file any lawsuits. I work with your team to ensure the reforms are properly implemented. And your airline becomes an industry leader in anti-discrimination practices rather than a cautionary tale. And Reynolds? Whitfield asked. That's between him and the criminal justice system, Jasmine said firmly. I won't interfere with that process, but I won't be pushing for maximum penalties either. My focus is on systemic change, not individual punishment. Whitfield studied her for a long moment. You've thought this through very carefully. I've had my entire life to think about these issues, Mr. Whitfield. What happened on that plane was just the catalyst for putting those thoughts into action. As Whitfield continued reviewing the document, Jasmine sipped her coffee, allowing him time to process her proposal. Finally, he looked up. I'll need to present this to the board, but, he hesitated, then continued with newfound resolve, I'll be recommending we accept your terms. And I'd like to thank you for offering a path forward that focuses on improvement rather than punishment. Don't thank me yet, Jasmine replied with a slight smile. Implementation will be the hard part. Back in Atlanta, as this meeting was taking place, Maxwell Reynolds was being formally charged with assault and battery with a hate crime enhancement. The district attorney, mindful of the case's high-profile nature, had assigned his most experienced prosecutor. Reynolds' attorney had negotiated his surrender, allowing him to arrive at the courthouse through a side entrance to avoid the media gauntlet at the main doors. Even so, photographers captured his downcast face as he was escorted inside. The arraignment was brief. Reynolds pleaded not guilty, was released on $50,000 bond, and ordered to surrender his passport. The judge also issued a formal restraining order prohibiting him from any contact with Jasmine Washington. Meanwhile, Atlantic Airways was dealing with an internal revolution. Following the viral video, employees across the company began speaking out about their own experiences with discrimination. Flight attendant Aisha Johnson, who had witnessed the assault, found herself at the center of this movement. During an impromptu gathering in the crew lounge at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Aisha addressed dozens of colleagues. "For too long, we've accepted that certain behaviors are just part of the job," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "We've warned each other about which captains to avoid, which routes are safer for people who look like me. That ends now." The assembled crew members, predominantly women and people of color, erupted in applause. Word of the meeting spread throughout the company, and similar gatherings began occurring at other major hubs. Atlantic Airways management, sensing the shifting tide and awaiting Whitfield's return from London, made a strategic decision. Rather than attempting to suppress this employee movement, they announced the creation of a diversity and inclusion task force, to be headed by none other than Aisha Johnson herself, who was immediately promoted to senior cabin services manager. When news of this development reached Jasmine in London, she smiled. Change was already beginning, even before her formal agreement with the airline was finalized. 3 days later, Thomas Whitfield held a press conference at Atlantic Airways headquarters. With Jasmine Washington standing beside him, he announced the airline's commitment to implementing her comprehensive reform plan. "Today marks a turning point for our company," Whitfield declared. "What happened to Ms. Washington was inexcusable, and it revealed deeper issues that demand addressing. We are committed to becoming the industry leader in equitable practices and anti-discrimination policies." Jasmine then stepped to the microphone. "I believe in transformation over punishment. In lasting change over temporary outrage. Atlantic Airways has demonstrated a genuine commitment to meaningful reform, and I look forward to working with them to create an airline where everyone, employees and passengers alike, is treated with dignity and respect." The press conference made international headlines, with business and social justice publications alike praising the innovative approach. Rather than a typical lawsuit ending in a confidential settlement, this very public partnership promised transparent, measurable change. For Maxwell Reynolds, watching the press conference on television in his attorney's office, the contrast could not have been more stark. While Jasmine Washington was channeling her experience into systemic improvement, his life continued to crumble. His attorney had just informed him that 3 more former colleagues had come forward with allegations of discriminatory behavior. The airline's internal investigation had uncovered emails and text messages in which he had used racial slurs. And his attorney's private investigator had discovered social media posts under a pseudonym that could further support the hate crime enhancement to his charges. "The prosecution has offered a plea deal," Victoria Mills informed him. "Guilty plea to simple assault, 2 years probation, mandatory anti-bias training, and community service. No jail time." "And if I don't take it?" Reynolds asked. Mills sighed. "Maxwell, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Multiple videos, dozens of witnesses, a documented history of similar behavior. If this goes to trial, you're looking at potential prison time." Reynolds stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline. "How did it come to this?" he whispered, more to himself than to his attorney. "It came to this," Mills replied anyway, "because for the first time in your life, you're facing real consequences for your actions." As Reynolds contemplated his limited options, across town at SecureNet headquarters, Jasmine Washington was presenting her newest innovation to her team, a comprehensive software platform designed to identify and address patterns of discriminatory behavior in any organization. "This isn't just about airlines," she explained to her executive team. "This is about creating tools that can help transform corporate culture across industries." The system, named Equity Analytics, would use AI to analyze complaints, reviews, and internal communications to identify problematic patterns before they escalated to incidents like the one she had experienced. Sometimes, Jasmine told her team, it takes something personal to illuminate a universal problem. "What happened to me was terrible, but if it leads to tools that can prevent similar experiences for thousands of others, then perhaps it served a greater purpose." As Jasmine's team began implementing her vision, Maxwell Reynolds sat alone in his empty house, contemplating the plea deal that represented the end of his career, his reputation, and the privilege that had insulated him from consequences throughout his life. Two different paths forward from one explosive moment, one leading to innovation and progress, the other to accountability and reflection. 6 months after the incident that had captivated the nation, Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters buzzed with activity. The company's largest conference room had been transformed into what employees now called the Transformation Center, a dedicated space for implementing Jasmine Washington's comprehensive anti-discrimination reforms. The walls were covered with charts tracking progress, hiring statistics showing a 28% increase in diversity among pilots and leadership positions, training completion rates for the mandatory anti-bias programs, and most prominently, a dashboard displaying real-time data from SecureNet's discrimination tracking software. Aisha Johnson, now Director of Equity and Inclusion for the airline, stood before a group of new flight attendants during their orientation. 6 months ago, I was just another flight attendant trying to avoid certain captains' flights, she told them. Today, we've completely revolutionized how this airline identifies and addresses discriminatory behavior. We don't warn each other about problematic crew members anymore, we report them, and action is taken. The statistics backed up her claim. In the 6 months since implementing Jasmine's reforms, passenger complaints alleging discrimination had decreased by 37%. Employee satisfaction scores among staff of color had risen by 42%. And the airline's stock had not only recovered its losses but had climbed to an all-time high as the company's reputation for equitable practices attracted both customers and top talent. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta, Maxwell Reynolds was living a very different reality. After accepting the plea deal, simple assault with a 2-year probation period, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory anti-bias training, he had found himself essentially unemployable in the aviation industry. His pilot's license had been suspended for 1 year by the FAA, but that was largely symbolic. No airline would touch him now, regardless of his technical qualifications. His name had become synonymous with the very behavior the industry was now actively working to eliminate. To make ends meet, Reynolds had taken a job at a small shipping company's warehouse, earning just above minimum wage loading and unloading trucks. The irony wasn't lost on him, having spent decades looking down on the unskilled labor that now provided his only income. On this particular evening, Reynolds sat on his worn sofa, watching a television special titled The Slap That Changed Aviation. The program featured interviews with passengers from the flight, industry experts, and even a few of his former colleagues. Captain Reynolds represented an old guard in aviation, one analyst explained on screen. An era when pilots, predominantly white men, operated with virtually unchecked authority. What's remarkable isn't that the incident occurred, but that it catalyzed such dramatic industry-wide change. The segment cut to Benjamin Chen, Reynolds' former co-pilot, speaking at an aviation conference about allyship. As a person of color in aviation, I witnessed discriminatory behavior but often stayed silent, Chen admitted to the audience. I convinced myself it wasn't my place to speak up. Now I understand that silence only enables discrimination to continue. Today, I'm committed to being an active ally, and I encourage every aviation professional to do the same. Reynolds switched off the television, uncomfortable with seeing people he had worked with discussing him as a cautionary tale. His phone buzzed with a text message from his anti-bias training counselor, reminding him of tomorrow's session. The mandatory training program, initially viewed by Reynolds as just another punishment to endure, had unexpectedly become the most transformative aspect of his experience. Under the guidance of Dr. Elaine Harper, an expert in unconscious bias, Reynolds had begun the painful process of examining the beliefs and attitudes that had shaped his behavior throughout his career. The goal isn't to make you feel guilty about being white, Dr. Harper had explained in their first session. It's to help you understand how certain advantages have been invisible to you, while disadvantages have been invisible to others. Initially resistant, Reynolds had gradually opened himself to the process, particularly after group sessions where he heard first-hand accounts from black aviation professionals about experiences similar to what he had put Jasmine Washington through. I never thought of myself as racist, he had admitted during a breakthrough session. I just thought I had higher standards than everyone else. And did you apply those higher standards equally to everyone? Dr. Harper had asked. The question had forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth: he hadn't. His standards had always been more stringently applied to women and people of color, while white male colleagues had received the benefit of the doubt. Now, 6 months into his probation and training, Reynolds was a changed man, not by choice initially, but by consequence. The loss of his career, reputation, and financial security had stripped away the privilege that had insulated him from self-reflection for decades. As Reynolds contemplated these changes, Jasmine Washington was addressing the board of directors at Atlantic Airways, presenting the 6-month progress report on the reform implementation. The numbers speak for themselves, she concluded after a detailed presentation. Atlantic Airways hasn't just improved, it has become the industry leader in equitable practices. Thomas Whitfield, who had staked his leadership on the success of the reforms, beamed with pride. Ms. Washington, when you first proposed this plan, many on this board were skeptical. They saw it as an expensive concession to avoid a lawsuit. Today, no one questions the value, both moral and financial, of the path you guided us toward. Jasmine acknowledged the praise with a gracious nod. The real credit goes to your employees who embraced these changes, particularly Ms. Johnson and her team. After the board meeting, Jasmine held a press conference where she finally went public with her dual roles as both SecureNet CEO and Atlanta's Chief of Police. For 2 years, I've served in both capacities because I believe that true safety requires both technological innovation and human compassion, she explained to the assembled reporters. My experience as a victim of discrimination reinforced my commitment to addressing systemic issues from multiple angles. The revelation created a new media frenzy. Magazine editors scrambled to secure cover interviews. Business publications highlighted her unprecedented career path. Law enforcement journals analyzed her innovative approaches to policing. Time magazine's cover, featuring Jasmine under the headline, "The Woman Who Changed Aviation," became the iconic image of the movement she had sparked. The same week that cover hit newsstands, Reynolds was completing his community service hours at a community center in Vine City, the same neighborhood where Jasmine had grown up. The irony was not lost on him as he helped renovate a computer lab that had been funded by the Washington Foundation. "You're doing good work," said the center's director, an older black woman who had known Jasmine since childhood. "That corner still needs painting." Reynolds nodded and returned to his task, finding unexpected satisfaction in the physical labor and tangible results. The community service that had been intended as punishment had become something closer to redemption, an opportunity to contribute positively to a community he had previously judged from a distance. As he worked, Reynolds overheard 2 teenagers discussing their plans to apply for the Washington Foundation's Aviation Scholarship, a new program specifically designed to increase diversity among pilots. "My mom says flying used to be just for old white guys," one teenager said. But Ms. Washington changed all that. Reynolds continued painting, reflecting on how his worst moment had inadvertently contributed to opportunities for these young people. The realization didn't erase his guilt, but it offered a glimmer of meaning amid his personal devastation. That evening, as Reynolds drove home from the community center, he passed a billboard advertising Atlantic Airways. The new campaign featured a diverse group of pilots and flight attendants with the tagline, "Everyone belongs in the sky." He pulled over to the side of the road, overcome by the weight of everything that had changed, in the industry, in society, and within himself, all catalyzed by those few seconds of rage 6 months earlier. For the first time since the incident, Maxwell Reynolds wept, not for himself or what he had lost, but for what he had only now begun to understand. 1 year to the day after the incident that had transformed both an industry and countless individual lives, the International Aviation Conference opened in Atlanta. The annual gathering of airline executives, industry regulators, and aviation professionals had chosen a theme that would have been unimaginable 12 months earlier: equity in the skies, building an aviation industry for all. The conference center's main hall was filled to capacity for the keynote address. Jasmine Washington, dressed in a striking cobalt blue suit, took the stage to thunderous applause. In the years since the incident, she had become not just a corporate leader but a symbol of resilience and strategic transformation. 1 year ago today, she began, I boarded a flight as a passenger and encountered the ugly face of discrimination in its most blatant form. Today, I stand before you not as a victim of that moment, but as a catalyst for the changes we've witnessed across the aviation industry. She went on to present remarkable statistics. In just 12 months, implementation of anti-discrimination protocols similar to those at Atlantic Airways had spread to 7 major airlines. Reports of discriminatory incidents had decreased by 43% across those carriers. Hiring of underrepresented groups in cockpit and leadership positions had increased by 37% industry-wide. These numbers represent more than corporate compliance, Jasmine emphasized. They represent real human experiences, passengers who felt welcomed rather than judged, employees who felt valued rather than tolerated, and a workplace culture that reflects the diverse world we serve. In the audience, executives nodded in agreement. What had begun as Atlantic Airways' crisis response had evolved into a competitive advantage, with travelers increasingly choosing airlines based on their demonstrated commitment to equitable practices. The business case for anti-discrimination efforts had become as compelling as the moral one. Among those listening intently was Maxwell Reynolds. He sat in the back row, unrecognized by most attendees. His appearance had changed significantly over the past year. The distinguished silver at his temples had given way to fully gray hair. The confident posture of command had been replaced by a more thoughtful, measured demeanor. He wore a simple navy suit instead of a pilot's uniform, a visual representation of his transformed identity. Reynolds had completed his anti-bias training program 6 months earlier, but had continued attending sessions voluntarily. He had finished his community service hours at the Vine City Community Center but still volunteered there weekly, teaching basic aviation principles to interested teenagers. His probation would end in another year, but his aviation career was permanently over. After months of struggling financially, he had eventually found work as a flight simulator instructor at a small technical college, teaching the technical aspects of flying without ever entering a cockpit again. As Jasmine concluded her keynote to a standing ovation, Reynolds remained seated, absorbing her words and the industry's response. He had come to the conference not to network or rebuild his career, but as part of his ongoing personal reckoning with the consequences of his actions. During the networking reception that followed, Reynolds stood alone by a window overlooking the Atlanta skyline, nursing a club soda. He had no intention of approaching Jasmine, he respected the restraining order that remained in effect, but fate had other plans. Mr. Reynolds. He turned to find Jasmine Washington standing before him, flanked by a discreet security detail. His heart raced with anxiety and shame. Ms. Washington, he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't trying to. I know, she interrupted. Security informed me you were registered for the conference. I'm not concerned about your presence here. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, two people whose lives had become inextricably linked by a single moment of violence, now face to face for the first time since that day. I received your letter, Jasmine finally said. 3 months earlier, as part of his therapy process, Reynolds had written a lengthy apology letter to Jasmine. He had sent it through his attorney to her legal team, unsure if she would ever actually read it. I meant every word, he replied quietly. I believe you did, she acknowledged. It took courage to admit the depth of the biases you carried, and even more to commit to addressing them. Reynolds shook his head slightly. Not courage. Necessity. I couldn't continue living with myself otherwise. Another silence fell between them, less tense than before. I don't expect forgiveness, Reynolds continued. What I did was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that the work you've driven forward, it's making a difference. Not just in policies and statistics, but in people. In me. Jasmine studied him thoughtfully. Transformation isn't about erasing the past, Mr. Reynolds. It's about creating a different future. The aviation industry is creating that future now, partially because of what happened between us. Because of what I did to you, he corrected gently. Yes, she agreed, unwilling to diminish his accountability. But also because of how I responded. We each made choices that day and in the days that followed. Your choice caused harm. My choice, I hope, created healing. A staff member approached, informing Jasmine that she was needed for a panel discussion. Before leaving, she turned back to Reynolds one last time. I don't offer forgiveness, Mr. Reynolds, because that's not mine to give. The harm you caused extends beyond me to every person who has experienced discrimination and felt the weight of systemic inequity. What I do offer is acknowledgement of your journey. Continue it, not for me, but for all the Jasmine Washingtons who will board flights in the future. With that, she was gone, leaving Reynolds with a complex mixture of emotions. Their exchange had offered no neat resolution, no cinematic moment of forgiveness or redemption. Instead, it reflected the messy, ongoing work of real transformation, both personal and systemic. Later that evening, at the conference's closing ceremony, Atlantic Airways CEO Thomas Whitfield made a major announcement. Jasmine Washington had been appointed to lead a new Federal Transportation Equity Commission, tasked with implementing similar reforms across all modes of public transportation. Ms. Washington's vision has transformed not just our airline but our entire industry, Whitfield declared. Now, that vision will help ensure that every American can travel with dignity, regardless of how they travel or who they are. The audience erupted in applause as Jasmine took the stage to accept the appointment. From his seat in the back, Reynolds joined in the applause, genuinely appreciative of the positive changes her leadership had created. As the conference concluded, Reynolds found himself on the same shuttle bus as a group of pilot trainees from Atlantic Airways' new diversity initiative. Among them was a young black woman who spoke excitedly about her upcoming first solo flight. I never thought I'd have this opportunity, she told her colleagues. Growing up, I didn't see pilots who looked like me. Reynolds listened silently, understanding in a way he never could have a year earlier how his attitudes and behaviors had been part of the barriers she described. The following morning, as Jasmine Washington boarded her flight back to Washington, D.C. to begin her new role, she was greeted by the aircraft's captain, a black man in his 40s who introduced himself as Atlantic Airways' newly appointed chief pilot. It's an honor to have you aboard, Ms. Washington, he said with genuine respect. You've changed the course of this industry. As the flight progressed, Jasmine observed a young black girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, watching the cockpit door with fascination. When the captain emerged briefly during the flight, he noticed her interest. Would you like to see the cockpit when we land? He asked her. The girl nodded enthusiastically, her eyes wide with excitement. Jasmine watched as, after landing, the captain presented the girl with a pair of plastic pilot's wings. Maybe you'll be flying these planes someday, he told her. I want to, the girl declared confidently. In that moment, Jasmine saw the full circle of transformation, from the painful slap that had stung her cheek 1 year ago to this child who now saw unlimited possibilities in the sky. The journey had been neither simple nor painless, but as Jasmine watched the young girl proudly pin the wings to her shirt, she knew it had been worth every difficult step. This powerful story reminds us that true change often begins with a single moment of injustice exposed. Jasmine Washington's response to discrimination demonstrates that the most effective reaction isn't always the most obvious one. Rather than seeking personal vengeance or financial compensation, she leveraged her unique position to create systemic transformation that benefited countless others. The story also illustrates how privilege can blind individuals to their own biases. Captain Reynolds never questioned his assumptions until forced to confront their devastating consequences. His journey shows that accountability, while painful, is necessary for growth. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative highlights the difference between punishment and progress. While Reynolds faced necessary consequences for his actions, the lasting impact came through institutional reform rather than individual retribution. Jasmine understood that changing systems affects more lives than changing one person. The aviation industry's transformation demonstrates that diversity isn't just a moral imperative but a business advantage. When organizations commit to equity, everyone benefits, from employees to customers to shareholders. Remember, discrimination thrives in silence. Speaking up, recording injustice, and demanding accountability are powerful tools for change. What discrimination have you witnessed or experienced in your daily life? How did you respond? Share your stories in the comments below. If you believe in creating positive change from negative experiences, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of transformation. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand up against injustice. Thank you for watching, and remember that each of us has the power to transform moments of pain into catalysts for meaningful change.